Well, thanks everybody for the time today. We've prepared this presentation on data science for business and project management specifically for this class, so we hope you enjoy it. We're going to start with a quick introduction about ourselves and then go into the content of today's talk. So I'm Charles. I hold a bachelor's in statistics and finance from the Wharton School. After that, I went on to build the country's first business data science research center, also at the Wharton School, after which I spent 7 years in Silicon Valley as a data scientist at hypergrowth startups. Derek holds a bachelor's in science in electrical engineering from Caltech. He also has a PhD in electrical engineering focused on physics from Stanford University. And similar to me, he went on to join several hypergrowth startups in Silicon Valley, where we met. Several years into this, about 4 years ago, we decided that we were going to start a data science consulting company. Why? You guys hear this term often enough because it's become this big thing. We decided to start it because we realized that there are a lot of problems that businesses face when it comes to data that are systemic and easy to solve. So we decided what we should probably do is go out and help as many businesses as possible solve these problems using data science. And what's interesting is it's not just in business that we're seeing this. We also work with medical device companies that are trying to make more accurate predictions about health outcomes or increase the speed with which they can make health decisions, and governments and nonprofits and so on and so forth. So it's everywhere. Today, we've broken up the schedule into 2 parts. We're going to be giving a short presentation over the course of 10 minutes. Where we'll be talking about data in the world at a 50,000-foot view, then in an organization or how it works in a company at a 40,000-foot view. Then we're going to talk about the day-to-day. And that's where I think you guys can start thinking about how will this apply to exactly what I'm doing after this with what I learned in this project management course. Then we ask that you hold your questions for the end because we're going to have 20 minutes of discussion or more to talk about what your reflections are, what you think about during the course of the presentation. And so the first thing that we wanted to talk about was data in the world. Why does data even matter? And how do you think about it? There's this great quotation from Peter Drucker, a famous management consultant, educator, and author, who's written over 20 books on the subject, extremely prolific in the world of management thinking. And he has this quotation, "That which gets measured gets managed," meaning if you measure it, if you have a number to look at and you reflect on it regularly, you can effectively manage it. And so what does that actually look like when it comes to data? So we usually break data thinking up into 4 steps, especially when you apply it to a company or a project. First, there's monitoring, which is understanding the ground truth about your company, your team or product or a project. In the data world, the way that you monitor things are through things called dashboards or reports. So these are sets of graphs that help you regularly look at a specific aspect of a problem. So for example, let's say you're running a grocery store. There's a problem called shrinkage. And shrinkage is the food you throw away because it expires on the shelf. And so in this case, when you're monitoring, you might be monitoring revenue and cost. You're asking yourself, all right, we're making $100 million, but it costs us 10 million to produce, and we're just throwing away all this extra food. And that becomes an obvious problem when you look at it, because that's 40% of your revenue. So in monitoring your company, you realize that a big cost is food waste. Then you ask yourself, why? And so that's when you start uncovering. And so that is custom or deep dive data analysis, where once you're monitoring and you've identified the what, and you notice that something's off, you go into the why am I seeing what I'm seeing? In this case, you might notice that you might ask yourself, am I just wasting food across the board, or is it happening with a particular food line, or is it happening at different stores? And this is actually a case that we worked on where the issue was that some food, too much food, was being sent to some stores and it was getting thrown away because it was expiring, and too little food was going to other stores. So they were getting sold out and they had this massive opportunity cost on the food that they weren't selling. So then the next question is, okay, we noticed that we're under allocating and over allocating based on store. The next question is, what do I do about that? And that's where business strategy comes in. So I've identified what's important. I've noticed that there's a problem. I found the cause of it. And I said, okay, now what can I do from a practical standpoint to execute? And in this case, what the business chose was, well, if we're overdoing things in some places and underdoing them in others, maybe what we should do is optimize distribution of food. So we're not doing this over under thing. And then after you've come up with a solution to the problem, you can proact. So machine learning is the tool that we use in the data world, which is how can I predict the future to make better decisions today? And in the shrinkage example, it's if I can forecast how much people will want in different stores and I can send the right amount to those stores, then we won't have this over under problem. And how do you actually monitor this stuff within an organization? Derek's going to tell you a little bit about the nuts and bolts.
Great, thanks, Charles. So overall, that just talks about at a high level, how can data be used throughout an organization or throughout many organizations. And so we're going to talk about how data flows through an organization now in this next section. So in general, at least underneath the hood, any organization has many data sources: marketing data, sales data, product data, labor-related data, right? And so those sit often in different data sources, right? You use different ERP, you use a CMS, you use many different sources to track parts of your business. And so in order to analyze all that stuff, so data sources here. And oftentimes in organizations that are still a bit old school, if you want to call it that, all of this sits in Excel spreadsheets, right? They're managing it. It's hard to manage. It's hard to scale. A lot of emails with different versions. So version control is a problem. And it's really unscalable and really hard to manage. But nowadays, there's technologies where you take these data sources, you build what's called data pipelines or connectors, and you load them into what's called a data warehouse or a centralized database. So this database basically holds all the data for an organization. And the power of that is it allows you to do analytics across and correlate between different data sources, right? How does product usage affect sales, the sales numbers, right? Or how does marketing affect sales, sorry, right? How does product usage affect retention, right? Whether customers are coming back or not. And those type of questions are hard to answer when you have disparate data sources and you can't put them all together into one place. So a lot of more contemporary companies now build data warehouses as a very one of the major efforts in order to modernize and be able to be more effective, because it powers the entire organization. So it kind of powers it in three ways, and Charles basically touched upon them. The first is, with data there, you can monitor how your company is doing, right? You can track, you have a dashboard and say, okay, here's the health of my company. Now, if you see problems, now you can analyze, you can deep dive, you can have analysts dive into the data and understand, why am I seeing those things, right? And then the third effort that you could do is machine learning, being proactive, predicting the future, right? And all of these are powered by having a data warehouse. So, in the future organizations that you guys might work in, it's important to just know that this type of structure exists. You yourself may not be, a software engineer that would be building this, but it's good to know that it does exist for a lot of modern companies, and it's good to ask about it or figure out where it is so you can do your job better. And then finally, day to day. So this section, we're just going from top down to the bottom, and the goal here is to give you tangible, useful things that you can bring to your job. Not just the 30,000-foot view, but things that you can do. And so we oftentimes in our work, not are we doing the technical piece, but we're also trying to help organizations be more data-driven or build a data-driven culture. And so for us, oftentimes that comes across in three different ways. The first one is being data-driven when you solve problems. Oftentimes people also refer to this as being hypothesis-driven approach. And so really that helps you be really efficient to understanding the root cause of problems, helping you generate, the right hypotheses, help you generate the right solutions and be able to implement them efficiently. And I'll go through an example of all three of these in the following slides. The next thing that to be data-driven and culturally is to always make sure you're measuring progress, not start a project and then be, okay, I think it's going well, I think it's not. But you want to have a hard number. You want to monitor it, you want to track it, and you want to understand how it's going so you can react to it properly. And finally, I would say one of the most important things culturally is having this idea that whenever you're presenting your ideas or having a debate internally with your team, to always have data to back up any assertion that you or your teammates are making, because that will allow conversations to be a lot more fruitful, right? You're actually debating on facts, not on opinions or feelings, right? So the key there is just have numbers, right, with you. When I say, I believe we should do X, Y, Z, you should have numbers that support that. So as an example, let's imagine, since this is a project management class, right? You're assigned a project. So let's say you're the VP of customer success, right? You're in charge of making sure all your customers are happy and they want to come back to your company. And let's say you're working for a company that is a streaming music platform, right? And so the first step, so in the scenario here, imagine the CEO comes to you and says, hey, we noticed that retention is dropping, right? Since you're the VP of customer success, you need to do something about that, right? So think of this as a big project. So if this is a project, let's first define what success for this project means. And this can be qualitative. So here we're saying, let's maximize retention, okay? The next step is, because we want to monitor, like Charles presented, want to define a metric, like something measurable that we can use to gauge whether we're successful or not. So here we're going to define metrics as month-over-month retention. Since this is a monthly subscription service, we want to make sure that any percentage, we want to look at the percentage of customers that actually come back the next month, given that they paid the previous month. And then after you define the metric, you need to find a goal. So you know what you're measuring. Now you need to know what threshold it is for success. So in this case, let's call it month-over-month retention being greater than 80%. And then finally, you need to find the data. That means making sure that the data to compute your metric exists, right? And that it's updated and it's something you can trust, because then you can actually look at your metric numbers. So here you would maybe go to your engineering team and make sure that monthly sales or subscriptions, by customer is in your data warehouse and is something that you can easily grab and trust that it's accurate. So in any project, you're going to run into road bumps, right? You're always going to be solving problems, putting out fires, right? And to move on and try to solve the problem. So here, retention is dropping. So what you want to do is understand why, right? You have to understand what the problem is or what the root cause is before you can come up with solutions. So with a hypothesis-driven framework, what you do is you gather your team and you generate ideas, right? So maybe one team member might say, well, I think it's competing apps are more user-friendly, so they're moving on to the competition's platform. Or users can't find the music they like, so they're less engaged. Or the website is hard to use, right? So they're not having good experience. These are all valid hypotheses. But the important thing here is that whenever your team is generating ideas, make sure everyone's backing up with data, right? Not just to say, I think this, I think that. And I'm sure whenever they present ideas, it's based off of facts. But it's hard if you can't say like users can't find the music because anytime they search, people don't play music, they leave the app, right? That's a good indicator that they're not finding what they want. And maybe you say 40% of people do that, right? So when you have a hard number, then when you're in discussion, you can actually compare, different hypotheses and actually have real debate. So the key thing is making sure you have data to support any of these hypotheses. And then when you go through as a team, you may want to triage, okay, what is the most impactful or what is the most likely reason given the data? And let's say in this case, we find that users can't find the music they like. So you ask the question, why again, right? You want to find the root cause. So you just got to be curious. So imagine then you look at the data, there are three possibilities. The tailored playlist feature is not very good, right? It's not really tailored well. Or the recommendation engine when recommending music is not recommending what they want, right? Or social discovery, they're having a hard time finding music that their friends are playing. So again, you go through this cycle of being data-driven discussions. And maybe it turns out that, with recommendation engines, you look at the data and you say, hey, in this feature for, recommendations, no one's clicking on any of the songs. only 10% of people click on the recommended song, right? So maybe you know that maybe the recommendation engine isn't very good. So this is kind of like an example of how to use hypothesis-driven thinking to kind of find root causes of problems and using data to do it. And then finally, you want to be able to react to, so you found the problem, let's react to it. Let's find the solution, let's implement it. So what you want to do is generate all the solution ideas, right? And then use data to triage them, right? What is the most cost, what's the cost benefit of doing these? And which one should we put our resources towards? And then finally, the last few steps, gather data, measure how each of these solutions are doing if you're implementing multiple or just the one, evaluate the outcome and then make a decision, right? In this case, if we built a new algorithm, is the new algorithm increasing engagement, right? If it's not, let's go back to the drawing board. If it is, great. We solved it, right? And then let's on to the next problem, right? And you go back and then analyze again. So this is kind of this loop. And so ultimately, the real value here is that with this data-driven culture approach, you and your team can discuss more efficiently, right? You can get to the main point, have hard data, not just don't talk about feelings or opinions. You can debate more productively, right? Get things done faster, right? Dig deeper into insights that you find. And finally, at a very high level, the main thing is here, you have greater influence, right? If you can go to the CEO, or if you can go to your superiors and say, hey, I did this research, and you say it's because I looked at the data says X, Y, Z, that's really powerful, right? And then that buys you more influence and more impact into the organization you're at. So with that, that's basically a talk. It was meant to be kind of short and quick with a lot of stuff. But we'd like to open it up for questions. And yeah, if you have any questions for us, we're happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me pause here and see about questions.
Okay, I'll bite. Did you mention Mark Morgan's name at the beginning of the speech? I don't remember exactly the quote. What gets measured gets managed.
Oh, it's
Peter Drucker.
Peter Drucker. I see. So we're reading a book right now in class, Executing Your Strategy, How to Break It Down and Get It Done. It's in that book too. He might be mentioned in there as well, but yeah, it's really cool to see that, I guess philosophy of approaching issues, seeing it in the real world. So that's great. And by the way, thanks so much for coming and talking to us. It's awesome. So I have a question. I'm curious about your transition from employee to employer in your new ventures. I guess it's more of a business question rather than project management. Well, I guess they're related, but so were there specifically unsavory things about working for hypergrowth companies in Silicon Valley? Or was it just the revelation that, hey, there's, all these systemic problems and we can help? Did you not like it, or did you see this pain point? Part two of that question is, do you think you've achieved your mission goals? And have you been bogged down by business development obstacles along the way?
So I'm going to summarize the questions to make sure that I heard them clearly and for the rest of the group, which is question number one. Did you leave to start a company only because you saw opportunity, or were there also problems with the Silicon Valley companies that you were working with? Did I summarize that well?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, great. The second question is, what are some of the challenges that you run into in business development and getting sales to build a business?
Yes, and whatever your intentions were coming out of part one, were they satisfied?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so challenges in business development and were your intentions satisfied? So I'll break that into two questions. Derek, it sounds like you had something for this.
No, I was just going to say that the first question I feel like you should respond to, since I think you have a very strong reaction to that question in general. Hypergrowth companies, working at hypergrowth companies and stuff.
Yeah, so I do. I'm thinking about how to present this.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. So So something that I'll also tell you, Elliot, is I actually spent 2 years in venture capital working at the venture capital fund Mavron in Seattle, founded by the CEO and founder of Starbucks. So I've also seen kind of the other side of the coin, which is the funding and boardroom side of the startup coin, which is kind of what eventually, that in addition to everything that I saw from the company startup, the coin got me to decide to leave. So and start my own thing. So recently we made the decision that we weren't going to work with venture-backed hyper-growth startups in Silicon Valley, very specifically because there's a culture of overwork. Why is there a culture of overwork? Because the way that you can extract the most value out of a labor force or employees is by creating urgency and the hope of a better future through equity, meaning that when you join a startup, you get cash compensation and you get stock options that you can later buy to participate in the success of the company. Every company has a great story because there are engines created for this. There are these incubators like Y Combinator that teach you how to tell the story of a great culture that's going up and to the right and is going to make you 2,000 times the money that you invest in the company. But from the other side, when you're on the investment side, what you see is about 85% of the companies will be worth about zero. Even if you have a successful venture capital fund, one of the most successful in the world, 85% failure rate, right? Which means even the best investors will lose on about 16 to 17 out of every 20 of the bets they make. Then you'll get another 2, that 3 to 5x, meaning that they'll triple to quintuple in value. And that's nice, but that's not what they care about. What they care about is the 20 to 100x unicorn that shows up 1 in 20 times. And the problem with being an employee and taking on this value proposition is that you don't have the information that the investor does, because the investor gets to look at the financials, gets to interview the board, gets to interview the people who have worked with the founders of the company, and really gets to see the guts of it. And not only that, they've been practicing looking at companies for years. So they have more information than you do. And so as an employee, when you walk into the situation, what you're told is you're going to be the 1 in 20. The fact is you're more than likely to be the 1 in 17. So there are a few huge winners, some partial winners, and a lot of losers. So one, the equity is worth nothing. There's a great narrative of hope. And then the last piece is that in order to maximize the possibility of a huge home run, what VCs and startups need to do is be really scrappy and extract value and be as lean as possible everywhere they can. Equity at an early stage is cheap, but cash is expensive, so they don't give you cash. And the hope that you'll actually make money on the equity is less than they would lead you to believe. So, okay, those are my issues with kind of venture-backed companies in a systemic way, right, from both an economic and a cultural standpoint. So why did I eventually get fed up? The last part is that venture-backed hyper-growth companies grow in a way that is almost unmanageable, in the sense that you take a 100-person company or 50-person company, you give them $60 million. You're not going to hire 60 employees for 1 year for $1 million each. You're looking to hire something like 300 employees. The problem is that when you scale an organization 2 times its size, so from 10 to 20 people, or 20 to 40, or 40 to 100, each time you double, you run into a whole new set of organizational communication process challenges. So imagine quadrupling or 10xing an organization over the course of 1 year. All of a sudden, things become extremely untenable. So you're growing really fast. It's very difficult to focus. It's very difficult to manage. So it feels really crazy. And so that was kind of the last piece, that things kind of felt like all over the place, that people were in due focus in a lot of different directions and are constantly changing the direction that they're focusing on. So you could be working on something for a year, and all of a sudden the board says, this isn't working. There's a new incumbent. We need to come up with we've discovered a new opportunity. We're going to pivot. And all the stuff you've been working on gets completely wiped out. And that can happen 4 times over the course of a year. Every quarter, they come up with a new initiative. Last quarter's work gets wiped out. So those are some of the reasons that I don't like startups, and specifically venture-backed startups. Some of the reasons that I do like them, they move really fast. They get a lot of really hungry people. You will spend a lot of time there. You will learn a lot. But balance that with the actual economic outcomes and kind of the intentions of the people who are running the organizations, who are running the companies. So then the second question was, so to answer your question, I left because things were disorganized and I thought I could do them better. And I think I'm not going to say that we can, but I'll say that related to your second point, business development, have we run into hurdles there? Thankfully, because of the experience that we got working at these companies, we developed networks that would get us a lot of business and help us start out. Frankly, 2 of our first clients were former employers.
Okay.
So they became two of our first clients. One of them is currently one of our largest clients, and not only that, because we've known so many people at that company over the course of years, they've left to other companies and they've brought us into their companies too. And I think that happens anywhere you go. But in that specific case, I would say it was the result of going to a company that really emphasized culture and hired really great people. And so, those great people stayed in touch with each other. And as they left other organizations, they continued to stay in touch because culture was so important.
I was going to just add to that, Charles. Basically, with all those people, like we really leveraged our network, right? And we also just understand, at least for our business, that really these relationships matter so much, right? And I think that's true for any business or any, when you're working, right? Like relationships really drive, and that's really what got us off the ground, right? Before we considered outbound, before we considered like the more traditional marketing routes, even till this day on year 4, we're starting year 4 very soon, right? It still have been referrals based on past clients or within our own personal network. So basically from that, I just encourage everyone to kind of think about how important it is, not to say you have to go to cocktail parties and network all the time, but just more like, make sure that relationships that matter to you, just make sure you keep them, right? And think about it from that perspective, from a business. It's important from a business side.
To Derek's point, it's kind of the number of relationships that you can maintain, and also the quality of the relationships. Be a great person everywhere you are, because that's what people remember of you. And so that has this wonderful multiplicative effect over the course of years, because you meet more people remember you. If you do a great job, especially in your work, that it almost becomes a pyramid, right? The way that that number of people or organizations grow. And to the last question, were we able to achieve our initial set of goals or our mission? 2, 3, and 4 years later, I have been astounded by in how many more ways we've been able to drive impact than just economic and just bring good data science to companies. So, for example, we were invited to help with a class action lawsuit representing disabled children against a healthcare institution that wasn't taking care of them, allegedly, right? But like that's a social impact that I never imagined I could have worked on, working at some tech company or manufacturing company or auto company or whatever. We've had the opportunity to work with several nonprofits. We've also worked on things like prostate cancer detection. So bringing the time in detecting cancer down from 21 days to milliseconds, in real time, being able to predict when a dialysis patient is developing an infection, and to be able to say, 3 to 5 days before a doctor catches it, that you should pay attention to this patient and give them antibiotics now, otherwise they're going to end up in the hospital. And that's stuff that I never would have guessed that we'd be working on. So, in addition to like just making it work financially, like there has been a lot of opportunity that I never would have foreseen.
And I think that's something I'll add to contrast that to the, work hard, play hard style of like, venture-backed startups is that one of the nice things is, at least for our type of business, we have a lot of control over our own time because of the type of business, and because we own our own business. We have a lot more control over work-life balance, right? I remember that our first year, July, it was around July 4th, and I was like, shoot, I should probably work, because any hour I don't work, right, we're not generating revenue because it's a consulting business. But over time, we realized, hey, we need to take breaks. It's important for mental health, right? To throttle and make sure that you're not, overburdening yourself, right? So I think that was one of the, maybe not say a goal we had set out to do, but a benefit that I think was nice for us, for our business. Great question.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Actually, I have a couple to add on to the previous questions. So my first question is, so he asked, what motivated you to be your own employer? What inspired you to choose this type of work? And what were some of like the downfalls of the company? Like, not saying like what you did bad, but like, was the coronavirus, did that affect you in a negative way? Did anything else affect you in a negative way? What were potential improvements?
So the question was, what were your inspirations or motivations for getting into this line of work? And then what are some of the biggest challenges that we faced in building our business? An example being coronavirus. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Derek, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So inspiration, let's see. So for me, I've always been kind of on the technical side of things as an engineer, a trained engineer. And I think the inspiration for data science was this really nice middle ground between technical work, but also people-facing work. So when I was in academia doing my dissertation, I actually spent a lot of time doing, just sitting in front of the computer, just sitting in lab, and doing stuff, right? And not really interacting with people. And as part of my personality, I really enjoy talking to people, right? And so data science is really cool because not even from a consulting business, when you're a data scientist within a company, because you sit on top of data, everyone wants to talk to you. You're liaison, right, with data. And so you basically sit at the heart of the company. So when I worked at a startup, the CEO was coming and talking to me all the time, right? Because I had information that they needed. So that was a really nice blend of technical work and people interaction. Yeah, I'll stop there. Charles, you want to share yours?
Yeah, so I'll start with the end and then go to the beginning, which is I worked my first job in finance because I thought it's what I should do, right? My parents really wanted me to. It's really popular at my school. And I got this great opportunity that everybody was like, oh, well, if you have that, you should take it. And so I took it, and it was maybe the 2 most miserable years of my adult life because I was a terrible mismatch so it was a terrible mismatch for my skill set. So what I did was, there's several exercises that I recommend for figuring out what's best for you. There's a book called StrengthsFinder 2.0, that helps you identify what you're really good at. After figuring out what you're good at and what you like, think about where in the world those skills could be used. And so what I did was, after I identified that I love working with large data sets, doing statistical analysis, I interviewed a bunch of people in different jobs and said, I think this is what you do. I think this is what I like, and I think what I'd like to do with my career, and that's how I ended up in data science. But that started with the very lucky experience that when I was in undergrad, I would completely lose track of time for half a day or like 12 hours just doing statistics problem sets. So if you find flow anywhere in your life, I would gravitate towards that. And Stephen, question for you. There was another question, which was what are some of the failures or pitfalls that you've had running a business? Do we have time for that, or do you think we should move into the lecture?
We probably are getting pretty close. I don't know. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, we have about 2 more minutes.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll tell you the first, second, and third pitfall in an incremental order. I think the first pitfall is fear. It's really scary to move in any direction when you don't know what the landscape looks like. And so I think the first one was not moving. I would say not moving fast enough because we didn't know what the risks were of moving in any direction. Then after a while, we got comfortable with just taking action, educated action, and then learning from taking some of the hits, and then like growing in a certain direction. The next is making bad investments in tools or projects. So similar to the first one, it's an unknown problem, meaning that like when you're hiring somebody to build a piece of software, or you're hiring somebody to do sales, or you're hiring somebody to help you with recruiting for the first time, you don't know the language of the space, you don't know the processes of the space, and so you don't know how to assess whether or not something is good, bad, or great. And then the last one was mistakes related to people. It's really, I think it takes a while to become extraordinarily clear on who you are and what your values are and what the values of the organization are, and therefore, what are the values of the people that you want to work with. And so some of the most costly mistakes were when we didn't spend enough time making sure that the people we hired or contracted with really lived through the values that are important to the organization. And so, we ended up trying something that didn't quite work. But I would say from an emotional standpoint, those hiring the wrong people that aren't aligned with your values take the biggest toll.
And to be specific, the toll isn't letting them go. The toll is actually working with them. No, not. It's not a personal thing, right? It's not they're bad people. It's just more like we're misaligned, right, on what expectations are. And so there's a lot of toll emotionally saying like, are they not performing, or they just didn't get it, or they don't care, right? It's like, and you think about these extra threads. So it's more of that, yeah.
That's such a great point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's to everyone's benefit for that fit to be good, right? They're happier, you're happier.
Yeah.
Better. I mean, but it's such a challenge it's such a great point to make, because it's so difficult to do, but you know it when it's right, and obviously also when it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I would highlight basically, like everyone says, an experienced person always says, people are the most important thing to a business. And, we just kind of said, okay, that kind of makes sense. But until we lived it,
Yeah.
like I would definitely back that statement up and say, like, really want to be careful about who you work with. And it makes a huge difference in just your day-to-day productivity.
Absolutely. Well, I should let them get started on their next part of their big project. Thank you so much. It was so awesome of you to take some time out and talk to the class. I really can't thank you enough. Any last second comments or questions?
Fantastic advice. I got a lot out of that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.